Pass Podcast 2025 MotoGP season review. On today's pod, we've got our big thoughts on the MotoGP season just gone. We've got who our rider of the year is, who our biggest disappointment of the year. Oh, well, I think we'll go with who was second in our rider of the year and our second biggest disappointment, because I think we can all agree on that pretty much straight away. But we've got lots of other categories as well. We've got our best race of the year. We've got our moments of the year. We've got our big impressions and big thoughts of the year as well. So we've also got some questions that came in from our Patreon supporters. So check out patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast to become a member. And if you sign up as a Paddock expert, you'll also be able to join us for a group call where we chat about all things racing. We did one of these only a couple of weeks ago, and we all had a lot of fun on it, as did our Patreon supporters as well. Adam Wheeler, David Emmett and Neil Morrison were our boots on the ground throughout the course of this MotoGP season, and there's no one better to ask for their impressions over the course of the year. So we'll get to that in a moment, but we do have important pre-Christmas questions to ask as well. And Adam, I'm going to come to you first.
Okay, why do you come to me first, Steve? Just because I'm A?
Alphabetical order.
No?
It's in no particular,
right, okay.
It's in no particular order other than alphabetical order. Adam, David, Neil. But when you look at it, who's the biggest Grinch in the paddock?
I mean, I thought you were going to ask who's the biggest Grinch on the call, on the podcast.
The two go hand in hand because it's going to be the same answer.
Well, I think between the four of us, we have distinctive elements of the Grinch. I think you kind of wedge us all together and it would be a horrific sight, but then it would, be quite close to the Grinch of Christmas. There's quite a few candidates, I think, Steve. It'd be a bit sort of impolite to name one.
He's going to say Marco Bezzecchi any minute now.
So I'll just say Dave.
You just say Dave. Dave, what about you? Like, if you were looking at it, who are you picking?
I don't know what the Grinch is. I've never seen the film because it's about Christmas.
Well, it's about a man, David, that started off hating Christmas, secretly loved it and was envious of all the people that enjoyed Christmas, and then by the end of it, absolutely loved Christmas. That's why I think you're the Grinch, because we all know how much you love Christmas.
No, I started off hating Christmas and then found out that actually I really, really, really loathe Christmas, and now I just merely despise it.
I'll ask you a different question, Neil. When you look at it over the course of the four of us on the pod, what's the Christmas song that comes to mind to you whenever you think of the Paddock Pass podcast?
Well, I can't look at Dave and not think of the lyrics, simply having a wonderful Christmas time. So probably that one is the one that stands out, Steve.
That's fair enough. Let's get straight into the hub of the pod this week, where we're looking at our 2025 season. And Adam, I'll come to you again first off for your big impression of the year.
Impression of the year. My key word, I think, is relentless. Of course, it was the longest season we've had in MotoGP with 22 Grand Prix. There were points where it felt like I was confused whether it was starting or it was ending or it would ever end. But otherwise, it was just quite nice having MotoGP on a consistent roll on tap. Perhaps there were too many back-to-back GPs. I know that was kind of designed to stop the triples coming up or making it even more demanding for teams. But yeah, it felt long. Of course, it was Marc Marquez's season. It was also a year I felt where Ducati, they won 17 out of 22 Grand Prix. So there's no way that they are, or, their kind of stint as MotoGP Kings is wavering, but it felt like they were taking a few more sort of jabs to the face. They looked a little bit more shakeable, to the point where I think even, most MotoGP fans would think, well, in 2027, it's really an open book. And it's not just going to be an all-Italian affair again. So, it was punctuated by, other memorable moments, of course. But yeah, I just think it was a long year, a Marc Marquez year. And MotoGP is entering that 11th hour of the current era.
Yeah. I think hope is obviously a big thing at Christmas time, Adam, and you're hoping for a bit of a change next year with Aprilia showing this year just how good they can be. But David, what about you? What was your big impression of the year?
Yeah, it's hard to get around Marc Marquez, really, isn't it? This was the championship that he came to win. This was basically when he took the decision to leave Honda. This was what we were waiting for. This is what he had been working towards. And you really saw that with like the explosion of emotion at Motegi once he had actually got the job done because it'd been such a long road back. It'd been such a journey. Yeah, I mean, like the interesting thing is, like both him and Alex really disguised the changes, the shifts. I think Adam makes a really, really good point about Ducati, because it has changed. If you see, you can see the concessions working. You know, we've seen Honda make improvements, we've seen Yamaha make improvements, we've seen Aprilia make really big steps. The Ducati isn't as dominant. They're still the best bike, but it's still that. But apart from that, I think it was just a really weird year. I mean, you know, the world champion starts off hopeful in Milan, smashes himself up in the Sepang test on the first day of the Sepang test, smashes himself up training, smashes himself, or well, gets sort of smashed into and comes very, very close to death. Really believes he's going to die in Qatar. Then talks about, you know, leaving. The possibility of leaving Aprilia, getting out of his contract, going to Honda, then coming back, and that's just one of the weird storylines. You know, Pedro Acosta wanting to lead. It was just a very, very. It was a strange year. Every time you thought you were getting a handle on the championships, something strange happened.
Yeah, that's all very fair. And I think a strange year in a lot of ways. And obviously, whenever you get the rider that wins the championship and misses the last quarter of a season, effectively, it's very unusual.
It's completely typical. You know, like someone wraps up the championship and then sort of the next race they're smashed up and we don't see them again.
Yeah,
you know, it was that sort of bonkers stuff. The stuff, you know, Pecco Bagnaia winning in bloody Motegi. What was that about? Nobody in Ducati understands that. You know.
Yeah, a strange year says a strange man, I think is going to be the takeaway headline from this podcast. But yeah, I mean, I agree with what both of you guys have said. I think if you are looking at the season from a glass half empty perspective, you could say that the racing wasn't brilliant largely. I think we had 3 really good sprint races across the season. We had a couple of interesting races, but they weren't like sort of bar to bar fighting overtakes on the last lap kind of races, but we did have definitely some entertaining races, but I think more often than not the racing was slightly processional. And you could also make the point that the championship fight was essentially over as early as Mugello, which was in early June, I think, because Mugello when Mark
Thailand.
Well, I mean, you could say Thailand, but I think beyond all doubt, at Mugello, because it was clear that Pecco wasn't going to make some kind of stirring comeback. Mugello was the place that he could have done that, and if Mark was able to win as comfortably as he did at Mugello, then I mean that was pretty much it, and that proved to be the case. And after 3 years, when we'd had the championship fight going down to the final race, we weren't able to count upon that sort of biting excitement going into the final part of the season. But if you're looking at it from a positive perspective, the glass half full perspective, I think you've got lots of really interesting stories, lots of really interesting things that happened this year. I mean, principal, chief of all was, of course, Mark's comeback. This was the culmination of the past 5 years of him going to hell and back, him being able to ride for the best team, on the best bike, well, one of the best bikes. And
the best bike. It's the best bike. I've run the numbers, and it's the best bike.
And just show that he is the rider that we all know that he is. And after 5 years of torment, for him to come back and ride at that level again, I think was a real sight to behold. And then all the kind of drama and weird storylines that Dave mentioned, the Martin saga with Aprilia, how Bezzecchi came of age again, Fabio Quartararo showing that he's one of the best riders in the world this year consistently, Honda's resurgence. Despite the racing not being brilliant, I think MotoGP sort of delivered kind of drama and intrigue and interest, certainly from my point of view covering the sport, I think on a fairly consistent basis. So yeah, I think the racing wasn't brilliant, but I still think it was an entertaining and fun year to cover the sport.
Bad racing, great stories.
Yeah, I mean, can we also, make a shout out for, I mean, your point about Fabio Quartararo, Neil, is spot on. I mean, those pole positions, those 5 pole positions all came, I think, where most of us were open mouthed at what he was able to accomplish in, Q2. It wasn't a case of like, he set the fastest lap early on and just sort of petered out the rest of the session. I mean, that was really, if you want to watch on the limit prototype Grand Prix motorcycle racing, then just check out any of Fabio Quartararo's laps in qualifying this year. But then Johann Zarco's emotional, Grand Prix win in France. I don't know, Pecco Bagnaya's bizarre swing to the point where everybody starts analysing his psychology. Raul Fernandez taking his first win after, 4 years in MotoGP. You've got Firmino Aguirre, a rookie, jumping on that motorcycle as well. I mean, there was plenty to chat about.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, I mean, you have to say that Johan Zarco's win was an absolute fairy tale. There was so much of that. Raul Fernandez win in Phillip Island is absolutely the high point of, okay, I 100% wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I thought that for me, I would agree with that one of the big moments for me was Zarco as well. I thought that win at Le Mans is one of those things that stands out through the course of the year, just because the French Grand Prix is always so big. But Neil, what about you? What was your moment of the year?
I mean, I can give you a sort of brief list, Steve, of moments. I mean, first of all, learning.
That's the whole point of moment,
Yeah.
Neil.
And
It's
don't take
singular.
any of mine.
Singular,
You have to take one.
singular. It doesn't have an S on it.
Come on, commit.
All right. Well, if I have to choose one, and as you're now in the kind of bullying phase of the year, I'm going to be forced into choosing one. And that one, I guess, is going to have to be probably the Sunday afternoon at Le Mans, but not because of Johan Zarco's win, because that was when a lot of people in the paddock first really understood that Jorge Martin was actually agitating for a move away from Aprilia, and that Honda was a serious possibility for him next year. I remember hearing that and just thinking, what? No way. And then hearing it from a couple of other very well-placed people that would not bullshit. And then that whole thing coming out the following day on the Monday after Le Mans. I remember it being particularly annoying because it was my birthday on the Tuesday and I was supposed to go away on holiday on the Wednesday. And rather than having all my work finished up before my holiday, it meant I had to work on overtime and was still working, I think, on the Wednesday when I went away. But that was just quite remarkable, how something that promised so much had soured so quickly, and then just also how that kind of story came full circle. Martin's return in Brno and how he dealt with the kind of the fallout in the press conference on the Thursday, I thought was really quite impressive for a guy to do that in his second language, to really have no understanding of what kind of questions were going to come his way. He did get a grilling. It was pretty uncomfortable in parts, and there was no way you could say that he got off lightly. But I thought the way he explained himself, the way he handled it, how he didn't try to sort of lie. He was just upfront and even maybe a little bit in your face with some of his comments about how he felt he didn't need to apologize. I just thought he kind of struck the kind of perfect tone. He took the perfect approach to how to deal with that.
So,
And,
Neil, are you telling me at the French GP, when Johan Zarco does his backflip again, the crowd are going bananas, his family is there, for the first time in ages, people are weeping openly, you pick a controversial moment of contract dispute. What happened to you in your life?
Clickbait.
we're all messy bitches at heart, Adam, and don't even pretend that you're anything other than that.
I think it's a great one. They set the tone for so much of what followed over the course of the summer as well, because a little bit like our impressions of the year, like you were saying, on track, we didn't really have that much drama. I don't think there was that many great races. There was those moments through races that were good, but overall the racing wasn't that great. But off track, we had tons of drama. We had tons of incidents. We had tons of discussion points. And ultimately, for a change with MotoGP, that's where the interest was this year. It was off track, and it's a strange one because you'd think that this is such an inspiring season, Mark and his comeback and all those things, but ultimately it was the off track things that made it really interesting for me.
Yeah, and just before I let you go, Dave, seeing Liverpool win the championship just before we recorded our, I think, Spanish GP review show. I mean, that's gonna stay with me forever.
Dave, I'm sure that was high on your list as well. Liverpool
Very high, just behind everything else.
Just behind everything else. Was it as high as sitting down and decorating your Christmas tree and all those things?
Oh yeah, it's right up there with getting the Christmas tree down. In fact,
getting the Christmas tree down somewhere in your anatomy, I'd imagine. But Dave, what about the moment of the year for you?
I mean, the moment for me was that moment when Marquez is standing next to his bike on the grid and the music starts to play, and then he runs off like a nutcase because he has realised that the track is drying out really, really quickly. It was really wet still when they went for the sighting lap. He knew the track was drying out. He checked the rules, got the rules wrong, but that didn't really matter. Ran off, decided that he was going to get on a bike on slicks, and everyone just like pelted off after him. It was fascinating in that there is only one rider who would come up with that, Marc Marquez. It's also, it's also typical of Marc Marquez's hubris in that he thought he knew the rules better than he did. He got the rules wrong. He would have been starting from pit lane rather than from the back of the grid like he thought. And everyone followed it. He did something and everyone followed him. And in the end, he came away really well because everyone started on slicks. Well, and then he got his just desserts by getting a little bit too greedy, cutting across a curb and losing the front. So yeah, that to me, it was almost, it was a sign that this was the old Marc again, the old Marc Marquez who did everything, found any advantage he possibly could to try to win.
Yeah, and I thought that just that sheer moment whenever they went to the sting and they had to cut out of it.
Yeah,
and,
exactly. It was
we
fantastic.
Didn't have the rodeo music for a split second, and I thought that's great. We don't have the MotoGP anthem. We're actually back to this. So for me, I'm actually inclined to think, you know what, David, getting that moment in is a really good shout, and just as a good shout for all of our supporters of the Paddock Pass podcast, check out renthal.com and the Fit My Bike tool to be able to see all the parts that are available for your make and model of motorcycle. They've been a huge supporter of the Paddock Pass podcast over the years, so check out renthal.com for the chains, sprockets, brake pads, everything for your bike that you're able to fit to it. And we're going to move on to our Rider of the Year.
Hang on, what about my moment?
Oh, sorry, Adam. I thought you'd picked Zarco. My mistake.
Yes.
You were defending Zarco to such a massive extent that I'll let you choose Johan Zarco at Le Mans as your moment.
Well, we put all that effort into bullying Neil. I mean, I've actually got 2 or 3 moments, so I can just crack on now.
Oh, right. Okay. All of a sudden, all of a sudden, yeah, exactly.
You can
all
see
of a
the
sudden,
hierarchy in this podcast.
Yeah.
But listen, my moment's very quick. Alex Marquez's win in Jerez. I think that was kind of typical, really, of his career. I mean, you're talking about a rider that had 5 seasons to really reach the top of Moto2, and then 6 seasons deep into MotoGP, finally grasped that win, using the full possibilities of the GP24. I also thought it was a Grand Prix where Marc Marquez's crash showed that as strong as the factory Ducati combination and the 93 would be, there were still those moments, like Dave pointed out at the previous round in Kota, where there was just this sort of unpredictability about Marc Marquez, and Alex being there in the wings. I think he finished second in 6 of the first sort of 10 to 12 GPs of the year. He was very much like his brother's wingman, and it seemed like incessantly we were writing the same sort of copy about the Marquez. So, yeah, but to see him winning that sort of signature race, I asked him in an interview, I interviewed him in Portimao, so right at the end of the season, whether that one stood out compared to his home GP of Catalonia, and he said Jerez immediately. So, we all know that GP, the Spanish GP, has a real kind of resonance, especially with like the local born riders. And to see Alex taking his first MotoGP win there, I think kind of showed that his career was hitting some sort of peak. So that was worthy of a mention, I thought.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Dad. Just to move on then to our Rider of the Year, Marc misses the end of the season and still comfortably wins the World Championship. I think it's fair to say Marc Marquez is the MotoGP Rider of the Year. No one's going to really dispute that too much.
Yeah.
But we're going to obviously discount him from our contrarian Rider of the Year, and we'll go for our runner-up of the year. And I'm quite curious to see what everyone says. But before we do that, we did have a question in from Corey and from Mark, and they were asking, how would Honda have fared if Marc had stayed and used the concession? So we'll use this as our chance just to talk a little bit about Marc and how strong he was this year. But David, if he had stayed at Honda, how would that have gone? Or would it have just been a continuance of what we've already seen from Honda over the years? Or would Romano and the changes that have happened within the hierarchy at Honda have allowed Marc to be more competitive?
No, I think losing Mark was what they needed to become more competitive, because it was a slap in the face. It was, it was a harsh reality they could not ignore. They kept on relying on Mark to find something. Mark believed that he could find something if he just had a little bit of something. And what he really, really needed was. They needed to have a reset to be able to actually find themselves again. It would have been interesting to see, but I don't think they would have made the same kind of progress. The expectations that with Mark leaving, the expectations changed. It's no longer okay. We're not going to win a championship because we don't have Mark. He's not going to win it for us. We have to reset. We have to start from nothing. We have to rebuild. And I think. Replacing Marc Marquez with Luca Marini was absolutely the best possible move for Honda, because it allowed them to rebuild, to develop quietly without too much pressure.
And Neil, when you look at it as well, would you share Dave's view, or do you think is it always worth having the best rider on the grid, best rider in the world on your bike?
It's definitely an interesting question. I think if you put Mark on the Honda in the second part of the season, I think he could have won races on occasion for sure. If Joan Mir was up there fighting for the podium and finishing on the podium in the likes of the Japanese and Malaysian Grand Prix, then I think Mark could have been definitely fighting somewhere closer towards the front. But would Honda have built such a sort of steady, rounded bike which multiple riders could use if Mark had still been there? Then that is, I think, a completely different question. And when Mark was there, more often than not, the Honda was a bike that only he could get things out of, and it was completely unrideable for their other three riders. This year we saw in different parts of the season, Zarco, Mir, and Marini all shown really well for Honda, and I think they wouldn't have reached that sort of balance had Mark stayed.
Yeah,
I agree. I think you have to look at the whole working processes of HRC as well, in terms of the hierarchy, priorities, budget. I think if Marc Marquez had stayed there, they would have catered everything to have really, pushed that package as they've done in the past.
Yeah, it was a chance to completely reorganize and reset, and that was what worked so well. He had to leave for Honda to be able to do this.
Yeah, and it kind of leads us into a question we had from Paul McMullen as well on Patreon. And Paul was asking, will the factory Ducati riders have a spec that's more like Mark's bike that he liked this year, or Pecco's bike from 24? Will all the Ducatis run the same spec? And Neil, that kind of leads in nicely to the fact that Mark likes to have a bike that the other riders can't ride, because he can ride around the problems easier than them or better than them. And he'll always back himself in that situation. And that was obviously one of the big talking points off track this year, that Pecco never felt comfortable with the bike, and Mark, ultimately, if you're the faster one, you're going to be the one that gets those decisions to go your way. So Paul's just asking whether all 6 Ducatis, factory Ducatis next year will be the same spec, or whether or not there'll be changes between the different bikes.
Yeah, no, I think there'll be changes. I don't think they'll all be 6 identical specs when we start the season next year. It could be a situation where 2 of them, because of course Alex Marquez is not going to be in the latest spec next year, so 2 of the 6 will be maybe 25 spec, and then you'll have I think fairly significant changes. I had an interview with Gigi Dall'Igna at the final race of the year in Valencia, and he said that he thought it was time to maybe press ahead and risk quite a bit over this off season going into next year, considering the advancements that Aprilia had made in the last couple of months and Ducati's advantage over the rest dwindling somewhat. So yeah, I don't think we're all going to see. I think we're going to see kind of, obviously the engine is more or less frozen, and they can maybe go between the 24 or the 25 engine, which have been homologated. But I think they're also going to be adding quite a few extra little bits there to try and reestablish that advantage that they had previously.
Yeah, Adam, just for our Rider of the Year conversation, then, are you happy to have Mark as your number one, or does missing those rounds make a difference for you in who you're going to decide on your Rider of the Year?
No, Steve, it'd be stupid to think of any other sort of nomination, but I think there are a case for a few riders to pop up. I mean, we've spoken before. I mean, one thing we didn't mention at the top of the show is that we had arguably the best season ever in Moto2, I think, and Neil and I covered this off in the Moto2, Moto3 show roundup that we did on Patreon. So if people want to sign up, they can hear that extra content. But the likes of Diego Morera, just surge into the front of, the intermediate class was 4 seasons in Grand Prix racing. Pretty damn impressive. But my vote, I guess, for Rider of the Year is Alex Marquez again. And I don't think you can really, poke too many holes in his scorecard. I mean, there were those moments in Assen, I think, where he broke his hand. A bit of an untimely accident there, but otherwise, he did pretty much everything that you would expect a satellite Ducati rider to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great shot. I think Alex had a great season and obviously surprised everyone with what he was able to do to be able to put that together. That's where the pressure really builds on him for next year to be able to back it up, to show whether it was just something that he's going to be able to do continuously. Because like you said earlier, Adam, the 6 years on a MotoGP bike, 5 years on a Moto2 bike, a few years on a Moto3 bike, he's always been a slow burner, but gets to where he needs to be. But now he has to really be able to back it up. But Dave, what about you? Who's your rider of the year?
I mean, my rider of the year is Fabio Quartararo. I think Neil was talking about him earlier. One of the great pleasures that I had this year was standing trackside and watching Fabio ride, and he is absolutely fantastic to watch. Actually riding the motorcycle, the way that he uses his body to manage that bike, the way that he uses himself to crawl around the bike, to control it, to push it. He has so much control. It's just astonishing. It's genuinely a pleasure to watch. Like, one of the greatest privileges that I, as a MotoGP journalist, have is to be able to get into pit lane and get trackside and actually see from fairly close up these people riding these bikes physically. This is the best that I've seen Fabio Quartararo ride. I think, I really hope that Yamaha have a competitive bike sort of next year, and I hope that Quartararo is on a competitive bike in 2027, because he is so much better than all the other Yamaha riders, and he's so much better than everyone else except for Marc Marquez and maybe Pedro Acosta. He is just such a fantastic rider, and like I said, an absolute joy to watch.
Yeah, but then you emotionally bullied him.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's
you broke him spiritually.
Yeah, abusive it was.
I have my duty as a journalist to try to break the spirit of any rider that dares to cross. No, but I mean, that was like I said, so many stories. How would the championship have turned out if he hadn't have had that like a washer go on the on his ride height device that meant that the rear dropped, because he was on his way at Silverstone to a clear win, and that would have changed like the dynamic within Yamaha. It would have changed the dynamic within the championship. It would have changed so many things.
Yeah, he really would have gone on to fight for the championship had he won that race.
No, he wouldn't. But he wouldn't have been so incredibly depressed by the end of the year. Do you know what I mean? Like, it would have given him a sense of optimism. It would have given him a little bit more faith. It might have changed the energy inside the project as well. When you get that close, when you get that close and something that frustrating happens, it makes a difference.
Just about that, Dave, because it's quite interesting that you mentioned about that Silverstone mechanical, because it did change a lot for Fabio. We've seen Manuel Pacino has said that Pedro Acosta is signed and sealed for next year. Looks like he'll leave in KTM. Fabio obviously on the market as well. What do you think of Yamaha's chances of keeping Fabio? I want to ask all three of you this, because it is one of those big things that the rider market starts turning. That was one of the big things when we did our Patreon question and answers last week. Everyone wants to know when we think things are going to fall into place. Does Fabio stay at Yamaha, or does he look elsewhere?
No, I mean, I think he leaves. I think he's already decided to leave. I think he decided to leave after the summer break, really. Even with the way that he was talking about the V4 was extremely negative. I think there's a loss of trust there, and it feels a lot like Yamaha. And I also think that Yamaha need him to leave so that they can no longer rely on him. So they go back to what they're good at, which is building a fantastic motorcycle that anyone can be quick on. They've gone down a little bit of a sort of a dead end. So yeah, I think they need him to leave.
I think he'll stay, and I think money talks quite a bit.
He's got loads of money.
Yeah,
but he'd trade it all for a little bit more, Dave.
He would. I'll tell you what he wouldn't trade. He wouldn't trade wins. He wouldn't trade a shot of the championship.
But who is Dave? I mean, we've said in 2027 it's a risk. I mean, the
Ducati.
KTM could be the best bike.
I mean, yeah, things do get a reset, but the thing is, the way that Yamaha, the position where Yamaha is, you can only base yourself on what you have now, and the way that things have developed. And Yamaha have promised Fabio a competitive bike for so long that I think he's just lost any belief in that. So he'll be on anything. The Aprilia is looking fantastic. You'd have to think that the Aprilia is going to be pretty competitive and it would be a very small step. And I think anyone will have him. So he is going to be able to choose what he wants to be on.
I think it's always interesting as well when the rider decisions come in. You say money won't be the factor, Dave. It mightn't be for Fabio, but for Fabio's manager, it'll certainly be a factor. And that's something that should never be discounted as well, because managers always want their cut. And there's a big difference between getting your big Yamaha paycheck or having to go further down.
Yeah, but
down
Fabio's manager is his best friend. So I don't think it's going to be a case of some sort of corporation looking after their 20%.
Yeah, it's very different. It's very different to like a big organization looking for as much money as possible. And in the end, it's Fabio who has to sign the contract. He has to put his money on it, or he has to put his name to the to the deal.
Neil, what about you? Do you think he stays?
No, I don't think he stays. No, I think I think everything that he's been saying over the last couple of months has indicated that he's pretty much decided that Yamaha are not going to be able to match his ambitions. And yeah, I mean, he's made his money, and he's given Yamaha 4 years recently when he didn't have to. And yeah, he's given them more than enough time, and he's in the peak of his career. He's riding better than ever, and I think it's the time to go and find a winning package. So, I think Fabio's going to be leaving. But Fabio was not my rider of the year, incidentally.
Oh yeah, good thing you get us back on topic, Neil.
It's Raul. Yeah. I knew you'd pick Raul, Neil.
Exactly. Just despite David, is Ralph? No, it's not Ralph Fernandez. I mean, what Mark
give credit where it's due.
What Mark did was so incredible, and there was maybe a slight tainting of his achievement this year by the fact that he wasn't present at the final 4 rounds. But he could have feasibly won 15 Sunday races this year had he not been injured in Indonesia, which would have been the most by any rider across any championship in Grand Prix history, which would have been just insane. I mean, what he did already was insane. And it's also just, I think, worth pointing out that he won 14 of the year's first 15 sprint races. The one he didn't win, he was second. And prior to this year, he'd only won 1 sprint race before. So he'd absolutely pinpointed one of his major weaknesses, which was Saturday, and certainly the sprint in the 2 years previously, and just completely nailed it by the time we got to Thailand, and was just so relentless in that sort of pursuit of near perfection at the start of the year. But as we've already agreed that he's the rider of the year, I'm going to go with Marco Bezzecchi as my rider of the year.
As debriefer of the year for Adam as well.
Yeah. Firstly, for his
king of content,
uplifting, beguiling, and engrossing debriefs that I found difficult to miss from the first race of the year until the last. And then also, if you cast your mind back to this time last year, there were lots of doubts about Bezzecchi. Lots of people thinking, I mean, why have Aprilia bothered? He was 12th in MotoGP last year in a Ducati team, okay, aboard a GP23, but he was easily outperformed by the 2 Marquez brothers last year. Really failed to build on what had been a really promising 2023. And yeah, there were just lots of question marks about how good he was. But I think he stepped up to the plate. Has 3 wins, 9 podiums, 3 sprint wins and 6 sprint podiums over the year. I think if you look at from the British Grand Prix in May, the 16 races, including Silverstone and onwards, he was showing podium potential in every single one of them, I think with the exception of Barcelona and Sepang. So aboard what was a really inconsistent package previously, one that could kind of perform in quite bizarre circumstances, and very low grip, unique situation. I mean, he just proved that he could be consistent, and the Aprilia could be consistent pretty much everywhere we went. And I think things maybe played into his favor somewhat with the Martin thing happening on the other side of the garage, but he was just able to keep his head down, show really good leadership skills, show complete devotion to Aprilia. And while his teammate was having many doubts about the strength of the project, he was able to show that he could he had full belief, and I think he was kind of rewarded with that, and just a really, really solid year. Yeah, really, really impressive.
Can I just point out that all of those things that you said are the stuff that I said after Jorge Martin was injured, and he was going to miss a lot of things. That he would grow. It was good for Aprilia because it would mean that Bezzecchi would grow into it. He would get a chance to actually carry it, and he really turned out that way. I've been looking at some of the how the championship would have played out without the two Marquez brothers, and going through how the championship sort of like played out, and it's really clear how strong Marco Bezzecchi was in the second half of the championship. Just astonishing. He went from being a long, long way behind to really overtaking, moving a long way forward, and moving the whole project on. So yeah, hats off to Bezzecchi. Bezzecchi has been fantastic this year. Just very, very impressive.
Really actually acted out your theory, Dave, by knocking Marquez off. So yeah, I see you two collaborated there on your theory making. And let's not forget the utterly memorable post-race celebrations as well.
Oh, what, the legs? Everyone loves a leg.
The proposal, loved the proposal as well. That was genuinely quite a good celebration, I thought.
I disagree. But
Neil,
anyway.
just on the Patreon as well, we did ask our followers for their rider of the year, and no surprise, it was Marc Marquez that came out top billing on that one. But we had some other names up. Bezzecchi ended up finishing second in our list, and then there was just a host of riders that all got a handful of votes. We did get a few comments in on it as well, and Nicky69 was saying that obviously it was Marc, but Rueda was his secondary shout. And some of those secondary shouts were quite interesting because we had quite a few options. We had Tony actually said Ayagura for some of his early season performances as a rookie. Lynn said that Lynn said that Marc got her vote, but she apologized to you, Adam. It was Bezzecchi that ultimately was her rider of the year. We had Ferdinand Aguirre was another mention as well for his win. But ultimately, it was a pretty easy one for Marc in that one. We did have a question and somewhat related to this in terms of the depth of the field, because MotoBell asked us about the fact that they view this as being the strongest and deepest field ever assembled in MotoGP. Yet we've seen it this year that someone like Danny Pedrosa or Paul came in and they were able to have really strong results. So does this give an indication that MotoGP bikes right now, with all the rider assistance, whether it's the aero or the electronics or the ride height control, are they making it where MotoGP bikes are now just more level across the field, where it's an easier task where the rider can't quite show the biggest difference? So Adam, what do you think of that question?
Well, let's dispel this notion that MotoGP bikes are easy to ride, because far from it. They may be somewhat more formulaic in terms of the processes the riders have to go through with the various sort of mechanical dimensions they have. But I mean, these are not easy motorbikes to ride. I think the answer may come, MotoBell, just because from the fact that the field is so close. And then you have some very, very, very capable test riders who, as recently as 12 months ago were winning Grand Prix in the case of sort of Aleix Espargaro. So it's, when you have these people sort of leaping back in for wildcard outings, then, they're able to post pretty good results. I mean, Cal Crutchlow went through some injury problems and, he was away from GPs, but when he came back in, he was still in a position where he could lap and figure for points. So I think, the level was incredible, but then also everything is just very, very, very close. And I think it's even more credit to people that do sort of suddenly join the grid and can take part in that. We should also just give Pol Espargaro some credit because, he came in, 4 replacement rides, I think, for Maverick Viñales and was top 10 pretty much every time.
I mean, the biggest difference is in the level of test riders rather than the level of the grid. The grid has been, the grid is really, really strong, but it's been the test riders. That's the level which has really increased.
That brings us into our next topic then as well, our race of the year. And David, I haven't teed you off as our number one hitter on any of these. So what's your race of the year? Do you actually remember any individual race this year?
No,
that's my biggest question for you, really.
They became a bit of a blur just because there were so many, but also there weren't really any memorable ones. As Neil was saying earlier on, and Adam, really, it's been a fantastic Moto2 season. Like, my race of the year is pretty much any Moto2 race. Most of them were
Don't pretend
fairly...
you watched any of them.
No,
I did.
No, Dave watched Moto3
the ones
when
that
Colin Vire was in
I
it,
did watch about.
and now he
I
watches
watched
it
6 or
whenever
7, and they were all crackers. So that's all good. There might have been a bad one. I'm not sure, but yeah, no, I mean, like they were mostly. It's been pretty good. GP. I mean, like to me, the one I enjoyed most was the Portimao sprint with the battle between Acosta, Zeki, Alex Marquez. It was just. That was a lot of fun. It was entertaining. It was interesting. But apart from that, it's been fairly... It's just not been a great year for racing. As we were saying, it's been a terrible year for racing and a great year for narrative, for stories.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Neil, you'll be able to pick some good races. Obviously, Moto2 can be high on the list. But if you were looking at the Premier class, what's your MotoGP of the year?
Yeah, I think my MotoGP of the year was the Indonesian GP, just because it was, well, firstly, so dramatic. Secondly, because we had some brilliant racing. And thirdly, because it was just so unpredictable and strange and random and difficult to make sense of. Obviously, the big incident with Bezzecchi and Mark on the first lap. Bezzecchi, easily the pre-race favourite, had come from 10th to win the sprint race on the Saturday. Then inexplicably gets caught out going into, I think, turn 5, takes Mark out. Both have a massive crash. And then we have a rookie clearing off at the front that no one really expected to win this season in Fermin Aldeguer. You had Pedro Acosta's brilliant defensive ride in second when he clearly didn't have the pace to be there, but just wouldn't let anyone through. And we had, I think, 11 riders fighting for second place at one point. Guys like Alex Rins, Ralph Fernandez, Luca Marini were up in the mix. Yeah, I mean, Indonesia, like let's go to more venues where it's 60 degrees track temperature and Michelin are forced to bring a kind of stiffer rear tire carcass because that seems to just throw everything a bit left field. So yeah, I think Indonesia, just for, there were points this year where I think everything became slightly predictable and we knew how things were going to play out even before the weekend had started. Indonesia was just the absolute contrary of that. So it was kind of nice to have that after what had been it was nice to have that randomness again after, what had been a couple of months of fairly predictable results.
Mentioning that, Neil, it seems even more staggering now that Pedro Acosta didn't get a win.
Yeah.
And even in the sprint in the second half of the season. And I mean, I think he possibly could be in with a shout of the rider of the year. I mean, he finished 4th, which is KTM's, highest classification in the championship for a rider. He equaled what Brad Binder and I think Paulo Espargaro might have been 5th actually. I think he tied with points with Dovi, but yeah, I thought Acosta was brilliant, and you highlighted how well he defended in Mandalika. That was pretty much one of the characteristics of the second half of 2025 MotoGP. Just seeing Acosta managing to rocket into one of the leading positions and hold his ground.
Yeah, I thought I would agree Indonesia was one of those ones for me because I thought it was a fantastic race because you didn't really know what way it was all going to play out, and that's what you want when you're watching a race. And 60-degree track temperature helps. So does a racing line that's literally a tire. Maybe we should just go to places that are used once a year as well, Neil. But Adam, what was your race of the year?
There's a little bit of irony attached to my race of the year, Steve, because I'm going to nominate Silverstone. The fact that so few people were actually there to see it, I just thought it was a wonderfully chaotic Grand Prix. We had, both of the Marquez brothers crashing out, Marco Bezzecchi riding brilliantly to take the win. As Neil mentioned earlier, and it was in that kind of whirlwind of gossip and speculation and conjecture about what would happen with Jorge Martin, and to see the face of Massimo Rivola post-race giving a debrief to the press, he just had this kind of demeanor of like, we're here to win. Is Jorge going to stay with us? Because, he spoke for over 10 minutes and maybe just 2 of those minutes were about Bezzecchi's victory and what Aprilia had achieved. And the rest of the time he was fending off, inquiries about Jorge Martin and what he was going to do. Zoe Zarco backing up the French GP win by getting on the podium. Dave's emotional, a slaughter of Fabio Quartararo after that. Some of those, the defining images of the season, with Fabio just on his hands and knees in utter disbelief that the Grand Prix got away from him. And then, of course, in Moto2, I know we're kind of talking about the Premier class, but to see David Alonso, Senna Agius just fighting right until the last corners, I thought it was a fantastic day of action. And it really stamped how much Silverstone, what it can bring to the calendar. And God,
Such a
more
good
people need
track.
to be there, damn it.
Yeah, it's such a good track and it produces really good racing. It's just that no one wants to go there.
I think for me, Silverstone is always fantastic because a lot like Phillip Island, a lot like Mugello, it just generates good racing. Part of the problem for Silverstone is there's a lot of places where the fans are so far away from the track just by its nature. But we really do need to have a bigger crowd there. And I remember for years I used to always take my dad and a few of his mates and we'd go and they'd sit in the Luffield section. They had a Roman grandstand ticket and they could go anywhere they wanted. Everyone ended up congregating there and it was always a great atmosphere. And we just need people to be able to go to Silverstone and see what it's like because it's such a great place for a motorbike race. So many races go down to that last corner as well. And it's always better when the start-finish straight is the old start-finish straight as well. Yeah. And you come through Woodcut and you've got that end of the lap, end of the race. It's always great. I love Silverstone as well, lad. And as always, with races of the year, it's very hard to pick any of them apart because by their nature, they're all fantastic. But surprise of the year is one that can be a good surprise. It can be a bad surprise. So, Neil, you were saying earlier on, whether you were a glass half full and glass half empty kind of guy. So I'm quite curious to see, is it a good surprise or is it a bad surprise for you?
Yeah, randomly and surprisingly, I think in itself for regular listeners, it's a glass half full response from me because I'm going to choose Honda as my surprise. You may look at this and say, what, a brand that has its top two riders 12th and 13th in the MotoGP Riders' Championship at the end of the year. How is that positive? But when you consider that Honda finished last in the Constructors' Championship in 2022, 23 and 24, this was a really strong kind of turnaround for them. We spoke about this a wee bit previously, but they won a race. Okay, it was in the wet, but they also had 3 dry podiums, Zarco scoring 1, Mir scoring 2. They also scored 210 more points this year in the Constructors' Championship compared to last year, which is a massive step forward. And just generally speaking, there seemed to be a kind of feel-good factor back at Honda, and it was really the first time that they had taken a notable step forward with their package, probably since 2018 over the off season, and we had just become so used to Honda being just so much money, but just so little idea of what was going on. And it seemed that they had a clear plan this year. They reorganized really well. They got the test team in order. They probably have one of the strongest test teams now, if not the strongest test team. And yeah, there was just a real clear sense of direction from, I think, the Thailand test. And the improvements that they were able to make throughout the year, especially in the second half of the season, were really, really very impressive indeed. So, Honda, I was not expecting them to be sitting as cushy as they are right now at the start of this season. And when you look at their rider lineup, Mir is a former MotoGP world champion. Zarco was a double Moto2 world champion, but Honda have always had an absolute superstar amidst their MotoGP ranks, going right the way back to 1982 when Freddie Spencer was their kind of golden boy. In the last 2 seasons, they haven't had that kind of real star quality, and I think they're in a situation now that if you added that star quality, like they will do in 2027. All things point to them being back toward the front of MotoGP again.
Can I disagree with Neil slightly? I mean, should we be that surprised that Honda actually got their shit together?
Yes.
That is genuinely a really good point. But they did seem completely lost. They seem to be wandering around, sort of very much wandering in the wilderness, without a plan. And they've turned it around and turned it into a real plan. They've gone up from category D concessions to category C. They went from 10% of the maximum manufacturer points to 35%, which is just massive. So I think it is a surprise.
Dave, it's interesting as well, though, because I remember I think it probably would have been about April or something like that, we were chatting, and it was one thing we brought up on the podcast, that the feedback that I had heard in the Superbike paddock from Honda people was that Romano had come in and it had made a big difference for how the test team was organized and how the test team were running, and they could run something from 5 years ago as a swing arm, but put in a different linkage. They were basically just saying, let's just go
through the old parts,
throw the catalog at it, and see what works. And I think it's quite interesting that Romano comes in, and Romano's he's not a leader. He showed that at Aprilia, but he's a great engineer, and he's able to come in and make big changes like that and help the project moved forward. Aleix came in as the test rider, and a little bit like what one of you were saying earlier on, the quality of test rider. If you've got a Grand Prix winner that's just off the bike, you're going to make a step forward on it. And when you look at it, when Romano came in and they basically threw the catalog at it and just said, let's figure out what combinations work well, that was really strong on his side, because the exact opposite of everything that happened at Ducati, where we have no idea what GP25s actually are. And Ducati's biggest problem is that they change the name each year. We've always talked about this, whereas the Honda doesn't. It's still an RCV and that's it. So they're able to bring in all these other parts, whereas Ducati always, because they've got a new name on each bike, it always feels that they have to make these giant strides forward. So I thought it was really interesting that Romano comes in, and with Aleix, they were able to really spend a lot of time just figuring out how to get that bike to work. But, you know, I thought it's an interesting one, Adam. It's a really good question to ask as well. But what's your biggest surprise of the year, Ad?
My surprise came at round 4 for the Qatar Grand Prix, and it was Maverick Vinales fighting up there, not quite for the win, but of course he crossed the line in second place. It was a surprise. It was great to see at the time, purely because KTM had started the season so poorly. I think Brad Binder had their best result, which was 7th. From the first 3 Grand Prix. I mean, Pedro Acosta crashed out, of course, in Thailand and was already starting to make noises that he was far from happy with the competitive package that he had. Now, although, Vinales was penalized down to, I think, 14th, with the tire pressure penalty, the fact that he was able to take the RC16 and show the potential of it, I think it was a really, really pivotal moment for KTM. And I think Pit Byra has commented on this in several interviews, that saying that Vinales and his attitude and his positivity was, fundamental also in their negotiations and their dealings with Pedro Acosta. I mean, let's not forget, I think, Dave, you mentioned it earlier, that Acosta was really at one point in danger of prematurely ending his contract and wanting to sort of escape from KTM altogether for 2026. But Vinales' approach and the fact that he was able to use that bike in that way, as the KTM messed around with a mass damper between all 4 riders, KTM were able to say to Acosta, look at the veteran sort of like in the garage door next to you. He's able to make it work. So knuckle down, work it out, see what you have to do with your crude cheap ultravathon. And, in the second half of the season, we've already extolled Pedro Acosta's virtues. So, yeah, I think Maverick being there on the podium in Losail was pretty surprising.
Yeah, I mean, my surprise is Alex Marquez. I mean, it's a bit of an odd choice, really, but we all knew that Alex was good, but we didn't know that he was this good. I mean, we were expecting him to be strong. Because he was on a good bike. He showed that he was fast in the preseason, but to come in and be as strong as he was, as we talked about, I think Ad was talking about earlier, I was just not expecting him to be that impressive. Really, again, I'm looking forward to 2026 to see if he can repeat it, because there's going to be more pressure on him. It's going to be a completely different situation. He is going to have the factory support. He's going to have the factory bike. But yeah, I was genuinely surprised for him to be that good. I would not have been surprised for him to win a race. For him to win at Jerez, I mean, that's great. But to see him actually be that consistently competitive, because he was second best for so long, and he was second best against the greatest rider probably we've ever seen. That really surprised me. It was his consistency, his ability to be second everywhere, to be fast everywhere. That really, really impressed me most.
Lads, he's ignored Raul again.
Raul will get his chance sometime.
Will he though, Dave? With you,
2026 is the year of the Fernandez.
Adrian.
Augusto.
Augusto, Adrian, all of them.
I tell you what. This has been a little bit of the Raul Fernandez section over the last few years. The biggest disappointment in MotoGP. It's not going to be Raul this year.
No,
it's obviously the Pecco Bagnaia trophy this year. We did have a question in, and it was related to, obviously we had a lot of questions in about Pecco, but Derek Gill was asking us, if Pecco doesn't find this form early in 2026, where does he end up on the grid? And Derek's also asking us whether or not Pecco's the standing that he has changed considerably. In the past, he was viewed as being someone like Jorge Lorenzo. Now, for Derek, he's comparing him to Jenson Button in Formula One, a driver that won his championship when the opportunity presented itself. Otherwise, was a second grade rider. And is that Pecco Bagnaia, or is the truth somewhere in the middle?
Let Adam go first.
Well, I mean, hasn't every world champion taken advantage of a slight kind of superiority of their technical package to win the championship? I mean, I don't think there's many riders who have won titles on utter complete dogs of motorcycles. It's just not really possible.
Oh, well, I mean, apart from Valentino Rossi and Marquez and I don't know, Freddie Spencer, maybe, possibly. I don't know what Kenny Roberts-Spike was like. Kevin Schwantz. I mean, apart from them, nobody's done it.
I don't know. I'll take you to account for half of the names you mentioned. But the easy answer, Steve, about Pecco is that he has a superb kind of safety cushion if the Ducati factory team, don't want his services anymore. And that means being in VR46. Which could be a much more, I don't want to say laid back, but it could be a less pressurized. Yeah, completely. I mean, he's going to be even more kind of bedded in an environment that he knows well. And I think it'll be kind of like the Franco Morbidelli situation a little bit, like we found in 2025. That would be
a good rider.
Tremendous braid fade at times.
I mean, it'd be really cool if Pecco, he's stated already he wants to stay with Ducati. So if there's another contract offer there, you imagine he's going to take it. But you'd have to give all the props in the world if he suddenly says, right, I'm signing for HRC or I'm going to move to KTM, something completely left field, because that would also be a little bit kind of Jorge Lorenzo-esque in just jumping completely, out of the boat into another one to show what you can do.
That didn't work out well at times for Jorge as well. But let's go into our secondary disappointments of the year. So, Neil, who was your runner-up to Pecco?
Yeah, my runner-up. Well, it wasn't necessarily riders being disappointing. It was more, I kind of used the wording of this in a more general sense, and kind of disappointments for me personally, things that happened in MotoGP. And one of them was
staying with me.
Well,
yeah, this is an hour show, Neil. It's an hour show.
Yeah, aside from that, I have called the Samaritans about that, Dave. And I think the authorities will be getting in touch with you in due course. But yeah, my two disappointments really of the year. Firstly, Maverick getting injured in Germany, because as Adam had previously mentioned, had been putting in some wonderful performances for KTM, had been the standard bearer of KTM for the first quarter of the season, and then got injured in Germany in his, when he was probably in his best moment. And I think we were sort of robbed of not just a couple of chances for him to maybe fight for victories again, like in Brno, where I think everything worked really well for KTM there. We know from Maverick's driving style that would have been a great track for him, but also would have just been so interesting to measure, would Acosta have been comfortably beating him in the second half of the year? Would Maverick have kind of been riding at Acosta's level? And if so, those two would have been fighting for the podium in many different races. I think that was a really interesting storyline that we kind of were robbed off by Maverick. Kind of unfortunate fall. And then the other one was Martin getting injured in Motegi, because he had been showing some really impressive speed prior to that. And then we went to places like Mandalika, where Aprilia was clearly so far ahead of everyone else. We went to places like Phillip Island, where you could say the same thing. And we could have been talking about Jorge Martin having this mildly triumphant final part of the year, and instead we didn't. And I think that kind of robbed the championship of another really interesting storyline, because it had been sort of building up slowly. He had a couple of really good rides before that Motegi injury, but now in many respects it's back to square one for him.
Dave, what about you? Who was your biggest disappointment of the year?
Well, I'm going to sort of carry on where Neil left off in terms of KTM, because KTM are the one factory. I mean, Ducati in the manufacturer standings lost a little bit of ground, but that was only compared to 2024, where 2024 they just destroyed everyone else. They lost a little bit of ground, but KTM didn't really make any big strides. Most of the big strides came from Maverick, as other people have pointed out, as Ad pointed out. Maverick had a really, really strong season, and pushed Pedro Acosta into being a better rider because he couldn't just use the excuses anymore. He had to do better. And the second half of the season, like Acosta made massive steps forward, but that was very much Pedro Acosta making the improvements. It felt like KTM at the end of the season at least had some sense of direction, but they were the one factory that where you didn't really think, we're going somewhere. We've got a goal. We've got an objective. It's such a shame. I mean, like if you look at where they were at the end of last year, virtually bankrupt and all of the other stuff that they've had going on, then they've come out of it relatively well. But you were really sort of like hoping that KTM would really have something for this year. And they didn't really. And now I think that, that they have lost their greatest asset, which is Pedro Acosta, who has probably signed for someone else.
For my disappointment, a very quick shout for the Hungarian Grand Prix. It really wasn't quite an appropriate circuit for MotoGP. I mean, it wasn't horrific as people were sort of building it up to be. The racing was pretty entertaining, but you could excuse that type of track if you had 100,000 people there and there was obvious demand, there was a thirst for MotoGP, but that wasn't quite the case either. So I think that GP flattered to deceive, and I hope maybe at Hungaroring there will be a new lease of life for that race in a couple of years. I would also like to say I think Moto E, there was so many disappointing elements of that series, not the commentary though, Neil. The action, of course, was, very extremely watchable. I mean, it was close stuff. It was pretty unpredictable, but I think it showed that recipe for racing doesn't always work. If you put out, a complete sort of formula across the board, have everything the same, you can get sort of close competitive stuff, but then it's not inspiring. It's not making people talk about it. It's not making the fans want to see these races. And it's such a shame that we haven't really seen anything on the electrical side from Ducati. The series just kind of petered out. You'd have to imagine if it was, say, like Harley Davidson's, they were sort of in the running for the tender before Ducati were confirmed as the Moto E technical supplier, what that would have looked like. And upon reflection and with hindsight, I think something far different with Moto E could have been done to make it more kind of attractive.
I think the problem with Moto E was because the bikes were fantastic. The bikes were this was a proper race bike, even though it was still a bit lardy and didn't have a great deal of range. It was a proper race bike. I think the problem was the riders. It was. Sorry to say, it was a bunch of B-tier riders who were all, good enough, and they produced some fantastic racing, but no one gave a shit about them. And that was the biggest problem. What you need is, like big characters. The nearest we had was Spanish Elvis, and that was pretty much it in terms of personality. But what we needed was much bigger personalities on the bikes.
And we didn't even get that many #knee downs from the Spanish Elvis.
No, we didn't. No,
another fundamental flaw in the series.
Yeah, I have to say, I won't miss Moto E, and I don't really particularly like single make series for that reason as well.
That you never watched, Steve.
I watched enough.
I'm sure he did.
I watched enough of it. I don't like those single make series for anything other than the likes of Red Bull Rookies or the Talent Cups, because they're for kids. I think that especially in the Grand Prix paddock, I think having something like that just doesn't really fit. I think if Moto E was in the Superbike paddock, it would probably fit a little bit easier than to go to the prototype paddock where you see the best of the best, and Moto E never really delivered on that. As Dave said, there was a lot of riders in it that weren't quite good enough for other places, and it never really tested them either, the shorter races and all those kind of things. A lot of good riders in it over the years that have gone on to have decent success elsewhere, but I'm not going to lament the loss of Moto E. But for our last topic, it's a personal one now. So Dave, we'll come to you first. What was your personal highlight or personal moment of the year?
Well, my personal moment of the year is always motorbike related. It's whenever I get to ride my motorbike between races, because it combines the two things.
Not in Austria, though.
No, not in Austria. Well, no, not on an Austrian mountaintop. However, well, in fact, because my moment was, I there's so many reasons for loving motorbikes. Well, I was going with from Germany to Brno from the Sachsenring to Brno with my wife, and we were riding through the Ore Mountains, the Erzgebirge, and a summer storm broke, and we sort of like rushed into this petrol station to shelter for a little while. And we were stuck there for maybe half an hour, and then it sort of went away, and then we rode away again. But those are the moments that, for me, make motorcycling magical, where you are there in the elements. You're stuck in the elements. You're stuck out, in the outside. You are part of the world. That was, it was anyway. Just ride motorbikes. It's magical, mate. It's just great. And when I'm riding along between two races with my wife, my life partner with me, it doesn't get any better than that.
Let's see if it does get any better than that by seeing what Adam's moment of the year was. Adam, can you top that?
How dare we call you the Grinch, Dave? That was I love that. That's,
As I said, Ad, by the end of the movie, the Grinch was full of love for everyone. So that is Dave's transition. He is
full of love for my wife because she's ace.
Okay. My personal moment. Have I mentioned once or twice that I got a book published this year?
Oh yeah, that was really good. Actually, I'll tell you what. Another great moment of mine was reading your book and finding out that it was actually really, really good.
Oh,
Too
Dave.
late, Grinch. Too late, Grinch.
Well, he's just checked his phone, and I'd sent him a little online payment before it was my turn.
Money's in.
Just for your book, Ad, just how difficult was it for you to be able to get that across the line?
Quite well. I mean, we covered this, I think, in a previous podcast. I think people can find it in the archive or on YouTube, Steve. But it was, pretty arduous at the end, especially when I had to cut so much of it out. Always guilty of overriding. So yeah, it was pretty tough to get the final word count slim twice actually before going to publication, and it got delayed because of that. So it was a little frustrating that it didn't come out for the start of the 2025 season. It was actually released COTA weekend, and oddly enough, it'll be released for COTA weekend next year for the US market. So that was a pretty cool moment. Other than that, every Grand Prix we played football, which was a gathering of riders, management, mechanics, technicians, and that was always great. And being able to use kind of the name of MotoGP sometimes to get some great pictures, like in Buriram, we played on the Chang International. We played on Chang United. No, hang on.
Buriram United.
Buriram United's training ground.
What's it called? The stadium, the Temple of Sound, or something like that.
Or something.
The Thunderdome. That's it.
We played on the training pitch, which was like a billiard table, and then we also played in the Aspire Dome in Qatar, which was pretty incredible, and then Northampton Town for the British Grand Prix because it was the end of the English football season. So that was pretty good. And yes, Alvaro Carpe, I have to say, one of the standout rookies from Moto3, is incredibly fast. Is as fast playing football as he is on that KTM. So it was frustrating trying to, sort of breathlessly run around taking the ball off the young Spaniard. But yes, highlights of the year.
The trick is just to take him down physically. Just go in, break his legs, job done.
This was always the thing, Dave. Whenever, like, when I was younger and you were playing, you were wondering why did the old boys just keep kicking the crap out of us? And then I went back and I had to play a match for my old team at one stage through the course this year, and suddenly I realized that I was nowhere near as fast as I had been in the past, so I had to resort to kicking the crap out of a little kid, and it made me feel like a big man. So that was my personal moment of the year, was feeling like a big man by beating up that kid. But Neil, what about you?
I always feel like a big man, Steve, but that's more just because of my stature.
Yeah, that's because you're 17 meters and 37 centimeters. That's why.
It's nothing to do with kicking the crap out of kids. I'll tell you, certainly.
I should say this kid was 22, actually, so it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, I'll tell you what wasn't my moment of the year, and that was having to listen to Dave and Ad bang on about the weather at Phillip Island, even though they weren't in the same hemisphere as the race circuit. That was
with full justification now.
Patience testing. But I think we had a couple of meetups this year for our podcast listeners in COTA on the Saturday night, which was absolutely fantastic. Just really nice to meet people that are fans of the show and to talk bikes with them and just to hear their kind of stories and their way into MotoGP. We also did a live show in Jerez and got to meet some followers there as well, which was really, really fun. But if I was to pick a personal moment, I'm going to pick a day. And I'll maybe give the game away at the start of this podcast. But yeah, Sunday at Jerez, because got in early. It was a beautiful day. Managed to watch warm-up and the rider parade trackside in the stadium section of Jerez, which obviously is one of the most fervent points in the whole calendar in terms of atmosphere. We had 3 pretty good races. We had a pretty dramatic MotoGP race where we saw a new MotoGP race winner. We saw Fabio Quartararo back on the podium. And then after that race had finished, I got to see Liverpool crowned as Premier League champions. And I think the day was finished. We were staying in this beautiful old apartment, Dave and I, with my mum and my girlfriend. And we ended the day with a glass of vermouth it had a lovely rooftop with a nice view out over an old square in Jerez. And I thought, you know what? In terms of days, it doesn't really get much better than this.
Obviously, it would get better for Dave if there had been the Jerez test on the Monday.
There was.
Well.
There was.
There you go, Dave. What a weekend.
Exactly. And then there was the power cut in the middle of the Jerez test. And
Dave and I were very smug, while everyone was trying to get home, we were there working at the circuit thing. We're all right.
And then I was driving over to a hotel to stay somewhere, and I was feeling very smug about actually having cash, so I could on the motorway get through the toll gates. So yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, and just we did ask our Patreon followers to send in some of their moments of the year just before the weekend, and we had lots of responses. Big sort of convergence of opinion was that Zarco's win in Le Mans, as well as Mark being crowned champion in Japan, were the kind of overriding moments. But a couple of other comments stood out as well. Martin Darlington said that Bez and the leg, if only to annoy Adam, was his moment of the year. Craig Stanyan,
Martin, very much so.
Yeah, Craig Stanyan said Mark running from the grid in Kota and then the others following him. It reminded him of the old PC game Lemmings, which I think is a decent comparison. Jesse Burkett, I think, was talking about the sprint race in Le Mans, saying that Acosta crashed late in the race with little to gain. And Neil Hodgson said on the TNT Sports commentary, he's crashed and he didn't have to. And ever since, and he didn't have to, has now been appended to mean any mistake or unforced error in our house. Michael Cassie said Zarco at Le Mans, the emotion that brought out, and having his parents there to see it, that can't be beaten. Andrew Duke said meeting Neil at Phillip Island, and Mark's reaction to the title in Japan. Obviously, I was number 1 and Mark was number 2 on that occasion.
Obviously.
Yeah,
and Short Decker, who I think was at Assen when he said, getting to go into the paddock with my dad. Thanks to you guys. Thanks a lot, guys, and keep up the great content. I think that was a result of winning a competition for a paddock pass in Assen. So great to hear that Short had a really good time.
And he gave us some rather delicious chocolates. So thank you very much, you would.
It didn't give me any rather delicious chocolates. But obviously enough for next year, we're going to be running similar competitions. You ran, I think it was 2 of those Paddock Pass competitions through the course of this season. And we'll have at least the same next year as well. That'll be for our annual subscribers as Paddock Insiders. So that's $120 a year. And that gets you all of our Paddock Note shows through the course of the season. It'll also be for our Paddock Experts and VIP tier as well.
And if you sign up now before the 31st of January, you get 10% off using the discount code Black Friday, all caps, all one word. So sign up. It's worth it. There's loads of really, really good stuff. I was going through some of our back catalogue of Patreon content, and it's just lots and lots of really good stuff and stuff that I still have to listen to.
Yeah, you need to get on it, Dave.
Yeah.
We've managed to get you sorted with your access to Patreon, and it has been great this year. We've been able to put together a lot of content. I think we've had over 200 unique items on Patreon over the course of this year, so really has been successful, and it's given a lot of content to all of our supporters. We've also, like I said at the top of the show, for our VIPs and for our expert tiers, we have a group call with them as well. We have one-to-one calls with the VIPs and a group call with the Paddock Experts, and everyone's able to basically ask any question they want related to racing, past, present, or future. So check that out on patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast. And as ever, a big thank you to Renthal Street for supporting the Paddock Pass Podcast.
Steve,
check out renthal.com.
Steve, wait. I think it's incredibly magnanimous of me to mention as well that Neil is the Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League champion.
Don't need to mention that. After an incredibly close duel.
Dave and I were watching with casual interest as this sort of fight to the death went down to the last. How do you feel, Neil?
Very content indeed. Yeah, and to be able to share this moment actually with Steve on the call, looking straight into the view from Steve's house
straight
in
into the view, and I'm very pleased about it.
I was spending way too much time thinking about my fantasy team in the last weeks of the season.
It was all we talked about, Neil, for the second half of the year.
You really
if you look
more.
back through our messages, all that we were talking about was maybe I'm going to put Chantra into my team this year as a gold rider. Maybe I'm going to do such and such.
Yeah, maybe part of me thinks that there are much more important things to be doing with my time, and then the other part thinks, nah, that is actually the most important thing, really, that I could have been doing. So, yeah, it feels great, Ad, to answer simply.
Yeah, it felt great, Ad, to
carry on, Steve,
for 21 of the 22 rounds. But as ever, that's how it goes. But we go into next year. I'm ready to go again. I'm ready to give myself another chance. And Ad, have you figured out the rules to MotoGP Fantasy yet?
Yeah, well, it's been 2 years of tragedy. Being hacked by Dave in 2024, and then some moments of forgetfulness in 2025. But I'll be hoping to move up from the thousands.
Do you think, though, did part of it come down to the fact that you made such a big deal out of beating the three of us the year before, that the last 2 years of hardship, it's almost like being a QPR fan?
No,
where,
I'm saying,
those
look
1
at
years,
Liverpool FC, Steve. I mean, Neil's harping on about, the serenity of the Spanish Grand Prix on a Sunday night. And now, if you apply it in football terms, there's distinctly sort of sweatier palms.
I think he's okay,
everything's
though.
cyclical.
I think he's okay, though, because he hasn't actually seen much of it since he kicked the television and broke it. So it's actually been okay for Neil the last wee while. The calmness that Neil shows right now. But as I said, a big thank you to everyone for following us on Patreon and to Renthal Street as well. This is our MotoGP season review. We will be back next week as well with another pod, and then we'll take our Christmas break. But keep an eye on Patreon for additional content over the course of the next couple of weeks.